So my name's Steve Olmsted. I've been at ADOT for about 16, I think this is my 16th year. Um, I don't sleep a lot. Whatever reason that is, I'm up a lot, like many of us. So it's amazing what you can get done when you've just decided you've had enough at 3 or 4 o'clock, and then all of a sudden around 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, it's funny for some of us, we get going again. So a lot of credit to a lot of people at ADOT and around the state, many of you on the phone, the federal level, and we've got a lot of wonderful participation from global partners, in particular academic institutions around the world. So I don't want it lost that in a slide deck, it can seem relatively amazing that these things are done, but it's been a long effort over the last 12 to 13 years. And it's kind of nice to be able to package it all. And I was actually really excited. I really didn't have an opportunity to kind of put some slides in toward the end that were what we were really looking at, in my opinion, out to 2030, 2035. So again, I'll move through some of these a little more quickly than others, but don't hesitate to flag something for a question later. So our world of responsibility. So I just put up some really light numbers at the top for the state of Arizona. I think some of the things are kind of amazing when we drive around our neighborhoods, city surface streets. What are we really talking? It's actually a staggering number. You're talking 140,000 maintenance lane miles. Maintenance lane mile being if you've got a highway with 3 or 4 or 5 lanes, they each count as a lane. So it's a lot in the state, 8,000 bridges, and obviously we have a border. So then the ADOT responsibilities are a lot. We manage 30,000 of those that kind of link those 140,000. We directly manage about 5,000 bridges, but we really have responsibility with our partners for the other 3,000 because of the ability to do the bridge inspection reports and things like that. 1,500 facility buildings is always an amazing number. That includes small tool sheds as well, but it's a lot of buildings. 15 port of entries, and then from a kind of a more so from a climate and resilience aspect, 114,000 square miles and sea level to 8,000 feet. The most amazing thing is really since pre-pandemic, the last bullet there is our new 5-year construction program is almost 10 billion. Sadly, that's inflationary, but nonetheless, at its core, it's quite an amazing number. So I did that again. Here we go. So I'll run through sustainability historically quickly, and then the resilience program. So I lend that picture there. I like to start out with, what are some actual activities that we find sustainable? This was a 2016 effort. Those of you that live more in the East Valley, the 202 Red Mountain Freeway was expanded with an HOV lane about 7 or 8 years ago. And this was a relatively expensive $1 million cement batch plant that was erected on site that saved hundreds and hundreds of continuous 10 cubic yard dump truck deliveries and cement mixer deliveries. So you kind of get the idea there where we already were looking at ways to reduce safety on the roadway and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from truck, diesel pollution and the such. Again, the foundation of the program goes back to 2012, even earlier, because we were fortunate to be kind of beta testing early sustainability tools with federal highways as far back as 2009 and 2010. But it's been a big effort, and it's kind of morphed into one of our focuses. You'll see more toward the second to last bullet, life cycle analysis, life cycle assessment, that should actually say, and life cycle cost analysis, and how those kind of relate to sustainability. So one of the ways in which we keep it continuous at the agency are every other year program operational focus areas for sustainability. I just gave you a kind of a sample. We break them down by group inside ADOT. So I think you guys can read them, but sustainable transportation planning, project development, operations, maintenance, agency, the such is actually growing from there, but I just fit one that was more comprehensive that would fit in the slide. And then you'll see related to that, we'll pick every other year 5 or 6, working with that group, 5 or 6 areas that we feel we can progress. So it's a mix. I'll be blunt. It's things we know we can achieve or we're about to achieve, or some things that stretch us a little bit on that side. And an example is using recent carbon reduction funding to program about 6 million in Phoenix metropolitan region and Flagstaff LED lighting as one example. So again, we're fortunate to be a partner with Federal Highways to champion sustainability. This is just one example, their Invest tool, but they're a lot of credit should go to Federal Highways. They're one of the more advanced infrastructure agencies at the federal level that's been doing sustainability for quite a long time, and often not in a very easy environment. So we felt ADOT spends upwards of 200 million a year, a little north of that lately, with some of the added funding both at the state and federal level, just on some form of pavement effort, whether it's capital intensive, full depth reclamation, basically simpler form is deeper road replacement, up to surface treatments. So we felt it was such a big area of ours. Following the start of the Sustainable Transportation Program in 2012, we developed an individual kind of black and green sustainable pavement systems program to function and live, in and of itself. So those are the two basic programs for sustainability. So we have an overall agency sustainable transportation program that we identify those operational focus areas. And then we have the sustainable pavement program. So from a resilience standpoint, really just as old. It actually went a little bit faster. It kind of leapfrogged past sustainability a little bit. Couple of reasons. There's a little bit more bottom line. Hate that that's often the driver, but in the world of economics and funding dynamics, it often is the driver. So there was a lot more of a more immediate, quantifiable business case for doing some resilience effort related to costs that we were being impacted. And so we developed an individual resilience program around 2015. Just gives you a little idea on how these kind of relate. The area we're talking about is kind of the bottom bullet there for transportation infrastructure, weather and natural hazard. I won't belabor this. Obviously, you guys will have access to the slide deck, but Federal Highways Order 5520, which was really progressive at the time, I think in 2014 or 2015, established a bit of a light explanation on definition of resilience. And then we have our own program, which really focuses a lot more on specific climate stressors, again, intense precipitation, system flooding, wildfires, wildfire-induced floods, and the such. So the realities of how do we work this? We're kind of a life cycle asset management risk-based program. Again, from a social, environmental, and economic standpoint is where they kind of relate, because a lot of the justification and funding prioritization and how we screen resilience efforts incorporate the wider set of sustainability inputs to make those decisions. But one of the things is, risk. And we've gone wider than just the environmental natural hazard risk that we built the program on over many years to now consider infrastructure and obviously overall agency risk. And then again, there's a repetitive list of some of the areas we focus on. How does this relate from a programmatic standpoint? Again, I said we're kind of a risk-based asset management lifecycle focus. So we have by requirement at the federal level a transportation asset management plan. This is the second iteration or revision was 2021. And to give you an idea, in there highlighted in blue, that within that asset management plan matrix, we've identified 33 total risks, and 17 of which are high or very high. And so for example, so extreme weather trends, heat trends, localized flooding, culverts that wear out or reach end of life and the such. So we've got 6 specific resilience asset management risk aspects in there, but they really connect to 7 or 8 more. So almost half of the 33 overall risk aspects are related to resilience. So again, too small to read, but do know that in 2017, we developed a climate engineering assessment for transportation assets, kind of an end-to-end engineering process that looks at identification. Again, just as I mentioned, justification. How do you screen those? What type of risk management or probability risk work do you do to decide what to do where and what to leave alone? And then obviously simulation and GIS. And then the holy grail, which I'll talk about later, is kind of life cycle modeling. And how do you monitor, create performance measures, and how do you just show the health of what you're investing money in? So we do have that. So really between the asset management reporting and the end-to-end programmatic process from a science and engineering standpoint to handle these different things, kind of collectively create our toolbox to do the project level planning. Again, visuals are worth 1,000 words. If I walk out today to take my walk later, it's absolutely beautiful. It's a little hard for me, right? Or anybody visiting Arizona, as though we have extreme events or things. Why the level of intensity to develop an entire dedicated resilience improvement plan? So, just a quick examples. Here's heavy runoff, slope degradation. That's I-17 to the left. Regional flooding in the urban area, landslides, extreme flooding scour, geomorphology, freeze thaw impacts. We have areas, Flagstaff can relate to this. I know their surface treatment program in the Flagstaff areas, their life cycle, their length of application life has diminished. And some of our areas go through as many as 200 freeze thaw rotations, per season, and it really impacts the life cycle of a lot of these roadways and infrastructure. So dust storms, everybody's aware of those. Regional flooding, rural, road closures and detours, impacts the travel time. Restoration costs and impacts to staff. Maintenance, emergency response, equipment needs, things like that. So the level of effort is there, and sometimes it seems they're very isolated impacts, but in Arizona they tend to be relatively extreme. So now I'll move to the future. Okay, so that generational change, a few of you may have been on, as Ann mentioned, a presentation I did a year ago. It was actually an interesting exercise. One, I can't believe it's been a year almost to the day. And then two, it really allowed me to look at some of the things I projected were areas that we would work on to see what we've actually been working on. Now, many of you are very familiar with the IIJA, the BIL, whichever moniker you are more familiar with it. But as Ann mentioned, there's both the formula protect money, that is a standardized formula allocation by state. And then some of you, I believe, on the phone, I have experience with the discretionary protect grant application process. So those continue. Again, for those of you that have a big interest in how those are affecting your immediate location around the state, the most immediate direct contact is through your planning area. And then from there, getting identified what projects of interest you have that have these specific extreme weather resilience or climate needs. But do know that's ongoing. And the discretionary is a little behind the formula money, but that first round is out. And I think this past year it was initially about 400 or 500 million, and Federal Highways actually added another 300 million at the end. So somewhere quite quickly they'll be announcing, the first 800 million in those discretionary, which Arizona has done a few. Again, you'll have it in the slide deck, but the IIJA and where there are funding programs of interest to people on this call and Sustainable Cities Network efforts, you can identify those. And sometimes they're very difficult to see what an apportioned program or what a bridge program is, but the identification of what's underlying that's changed from the traditional funding mechanisms, what's now allowable under a lot of these programs relative to, say, sustainability or resilience and the such have changed. And then the ones that are a little more straight ahead, electric vehicle programs, and then some of the more arcane planning entities like congestion relief, reconnecting communities and the such. So many of you are familiar with those grant opportunities that have either happened or continue to come out on a monthly basis, which is, I know for many of you grant writers, is overwhelming. So again, I mentioned protect, both formula and discretionary. I'll roll up to that top area in blue. From a climate and resilience standpoint, you've got a host of opportunities for entry points that we're taking advantage of. Many of you, it's almost in reverse. Hopefully we're doing the right thing for you as partners along our roadsides, whether it's a state route or the interstate, and you're being properly incorporated in some of those considerations. I will say, though, you haven't missed a lot. There's a multi-year use period for protect funds, especially at the formula level. And I will tell you that we've been working on a lot of the reporting and policy opportunities that make some of the funding share less burdensome on the state. So do know that we've having to do some of the, we'll just call it some of the administrative plumbing, and haven't extensively gone out with a lot of the protect formula projects yet. But I think over the next year, you'll start to see more of that as we get kind of the procurement and financial management efforts in place. We could spend hours talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a lot. Again, it's generational opportunity funding. I will point you to one. You simply could look up FHWA, Inflation Reduction Act. I bet this particular screenshot I grabbed comes up on the first couple, or you can go all the way through and actually look up that guidebook. It's exhaustive. I'm not saying everybody on the phone is a reader. It's 184 pages. No, I didn't know that. I opened it and looked. I've read it, and it really gives you a very clear landscape. Again, I understand the dynamics of the next presidential election, any number of things for future funding years at the federal level, but do know the landscape that lays out. That particular guidebook is extremely beneficial. How are we doing? Let's see. Okay, we're doing pretty good on time. So let's move to the next 6 or 7 years. Okay, so we'll do resilience first. This is our current $650 million I-17 Flex Lane project. For those of you that are spend a lot of time going up north, this is our effort between Anthem and Sunset Point. The lower half is a lane addition from Anthem to Black Canyon City. From Black Canyon City to Sunset Point is a flex lane. So we're adding a lane on the southbound side that will flex to either go north or south, depending on the traffic levels. It's really one of the first efforts along those lines in the country. The reason I bring it up is it's the very first, it's a design build project, which really means for the most part, it's a public-private partnership, meaning that there's a relationship in both risk and cost that we've outsourced, more so in this instance. And it's happening more and more for especially extremely expensive projects where we really need funding, design engineering, and contractor participation. The reason I bring this project up is contractually, it was the very first project in which I've got construction water use requirements into the contractual document. So going forward, at least on major projects, the requirements that I foresee, just simply because we're in Arizona and there's just been, beyond awareness on water scarcity, that we really weren't doing as much as we could. So what we'll be requiring, especially on major projects, is construction water use sourcing. In particular, vexing for this project, I will say, and then overall reporting of how you're doing on your construction water use projections. So do know that was one area that was really important to me that has measurably accelerated over the last year. I'll go through a little bit of engineering. I know that may not be the main brunt of everything. I just wanted to include some of it to just really overall, if you could get anything out of this, it would really be to understand the kind of I guess the blending of evidence-driven scientific decision-making into the traditional engineering design environment, the use of advanced modeling tools, the nature in which we're trying to advance probabilistic risk modeling, which simply is a fancy word for saying a lot more attributes in which you're considering, and how you're modeling hundreds of different outcomes to make better determinations on the future, okay? As opposed to historically relying on what you've always done. It's really finding a better way to considering, what could happen in the future, albeit, admittedly still very difficult to do. So this was a highway stormwater pump reliability tool that ASU Fulton School of, or the Built Environment and Sustainability School helped us with. And it really developed an entire web-based tool with kind of probability, historical precipitation events, pump house operations, any number of pump mechanical inputs to build this entire tool for our pump and tunnel team to do that. And just to give you a small sampling, some of the underlying coding was very statistical in nature. And as I said, the number of hours the pump would run, the historical nature of storm events, historical National Weather Service precipitation information, all kind of worked into those statistical models to build scenarios. As an advanced update on this, we've now just funded the high-speed fiber optic network to connect every one of these pump houses in the valley to our main location in Phoenix. So that's a huge undertaking that's building upon what we're already doing here from a dashboard standpoint. So we were asked to assist with a GAO report to Congress to really identify, we've been, again, fortunate for a lot of partners to communicate how we were already doing resilience building. I mentioned protect, I mentioned a lot of opportunities going forward, but we really did our very first, what I guess I would consider a resilience undertaking in 2014. We did our second one in 2015. It was really where those two instances we added on in the range of $500,000 worth of culvert and drainage work onto very traditional road rehabilitation efforts, one on I-8 and one up in our Navajo country in the Northeast. So they were, the idea of kind of importing a different type of engineering discipline into another type of infrastructure project seems quite common sense, but often was not the traditional norm in the way we did things. So we've been at it for a while. I'll give you a more modern example, State Route 80 in St. David, Arizona, kind of southeast of Tucson. This is the San Pedro River. And we knew this bridge had reached end of life and it overtops even at the 50-year storm. It's a relatively elevated bridge, but due to the intensity and the magnitude of the San Pedro River, it was very susceptible to being overtopped in even the 50-year event. So again, we had to do some justification. We did some root cause analysis. I won't belabor the point too much on this, but bulleted there are some of the considerations. We looked at the overall watershed, hydraulic engineering, scour sediment, some of our other tools, what's the biotic community. And the bottom line is what I'd most like you to identify with is the consideration of future climate trends using a lot of the global climate models. It was one of our first efforts in it's a national case study for incorporating those things. Again, some things we did, we reduced the number of bridge spans ultimately out of the assessment when we looked at what was foreseeable in the future and what we thought it should be better built to. We reduced the spans to reduce the susceptibility of scour and forces hitting the bridge piers. We deepened the bridge piles, or the drilled shafts, I should say. We raised the bridge a foot, and we left the old bridge abutments, which is the end piece that holds up the end of the bridge in place, and then additionally added new ones to kind of a double reinforcement. And here, these pictures were from March 29th. So we had started on this GAO report in 2021. And it just takes a long time to do these things. So that is the actual bridge in place, and it should be done over the next 60 days. So again, it's probably our 20 or 21st example of resilience building. I don't want to mislead everybody. Some of those are very simple desktop efforts in which we've done roadside ditches or culvert extension, small work. But this is one of our largest efforts. So we added an additional $1.5 million to the $9 million bridge project to do these kind of resilience enhancements. I'll move along a little bit quicker. So again, from a technical nature, we have a huge partnership with USGS to do high-end resilience, post-resilience building monitoring. Okay, we have to go back and then justify the money that we did spend. How's it going? Was it really worth it? And that's new for us. So we developed some kind of monitoring tools to understand how things are going. I think the important part is that middle right photo where you see the red and yellow and green colorization, what this is doing is that modeled the old forces of water that were pushing against the bridge. And then you can see the new constructed, a much more easier meandering wash through the middle there. So, this is kind of post-resilience tracking. And then here it is over the last year or two. And then just to add the complexities of resilience in Arizona, you'll notice that what we lovingly refer to as an oxbow to the middle lower right. So we solved the bridge problem on the upper left, but we knew we had a problem there at the oxbow. And over the last 5 years, that's moved 80 feet closer to the roadway. So we'll have to figure out how to mitigate that, because at some point it's going to completely reach the roadway over the next 5 or 10 years, depending on the flows. And then more monitoring and analysis again. So on the climate modeling side, I just didn't want to spend too much time on this, but I did want you to know that we are incorporating them. This is an example of that state route effort, the bridge effort that I just mentioned. We looked at, there's upwards of 30 climate models, depending on what you're really after. We looked at 19 of those models, and we looked at what those model outputs would be for 2050 and 2100, and then kind of synthesize those down to apply to the location where the bridge exists. Okay, and it's not an exact science, obviously. But again, just doing it and then linking kind of that 30,000 foot climate view to 12 kilometer, 6 kilometer grid view on the ground was one of the intentions of that pilot study. And then more, how that actually works from you look 30,000 foot all the way down to a small resolution grid on how you can connect some of those things. So I think I had a Forest Service person on there, Alex, if I'm not mistaken. So for the benefit, I guess it was timely that I stuck that one slide in. We are undertaking an agency, district, and roadway wildfire impact assessment across the entire state. We haven't gotten started on that yet, but we were afforded funding from federal highways to get that done. So that study will start. It's been long overdue. It's been on my wish list for a decade, but I have had not the money to allocate to dedicated wildfire impacts for roadway infrastructure. And then, as I said, it's really important to develop those performance metrics. So let me go a little quicker because I want to make sure we get to the end, the most important slides far out. So here's the last half decade. Again, I mentioned the kind of the construction water use. We'll look at sustainability first. We're undergoing and participating in Federal Highways Climate Challenge right now. And we're just really looking at ways to quantify the impacts of different sustainability attributes on pavements. Again, ways to reduce carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. There's an overarching effort, and I think some of us are well aware it's more directly applied or a requirement or a dream, no matter what word you use, of kind of that 2050 net zero. So we're cognizant of that. We don't have an adoptive policy for a 2050 net zero. There are efforts at the governor's level to develop some targets that start to look at some of those things, and we would be participating accordingly. But do know we're cognizant of that and developing those life cycle assessment efforts on raw materials, plant operators, how we look at design, engineering, and materials usage, and then our relationship with our contractors. And that'll be going on through this year. It's a little more delayed, so we'll probably be all the way into 2024. And it starts to introduce things like environmental product declarations. The easiest way for those of you that are a little less familiar with those, it's in a way to probably a little oversimplified, but it's similar to your nutrition label when you go to the grocery store and you're totally curious about, I just love that food. I know it's not good for me, and maybe I shouldn't look at the nutrition label, but I'm going to. So it's kind of a format in which you categorize and start to articulate by product category across the country, kind of a labeling effort. And that's being overseen by the EPA with participation from Federal Highways. I will give Federal Highways a ton of credit. They undertook a global benchmarking study. They started that last fall, and it continues over the next years. And they visited several countries that are highly advanced in some of those sustainability attributes, especially at the sustainability and resilience level at greenhouse gas emissions modeling for transportation. So those you'll see much more information coming out over the next couple of years as that undertaking, the global benchmarking program, gets reporting underway. And some of this will link for you, for many of you, in what we start to see green public procurement look like. And again, a lot of these are new words: environmental product declarations, product category rules, global benchmarking, green public procurement. So that's kind of that generational change that a lot of these monies are in place for. Again, I'll point out the EPA effort. There are two efforts. One is, as I mentioned, an internal EPA, Federal Highways, and other federal agency effort to normalize and standardize what is a sustainable material and how do you quantify it, and then how do you label it. The second part of that is a little bit more of a state DOT, state level partnering opportunity where there were funds made available in order to program build, to ultimately respond to any federal level programming that they did develop. The second part, I think many of you probably have kept up, these things get around the ether fairly quickly. And that's the last couple of weeks, the companion federal highways effort to these EPA labeling and carbon modeling efforts that EPA is taking. Federal Highways has announced their $2 billion low carbon materials program. So what the LCTM is, it's a new state DOT, the first round. So let me qualify that. The first round is a state DOT opportunity for all 50 states to participate in acquiring access to funding that would help incentivize or support the actual purchase and use of low carbon sustainable materials. So you get the general idea here. What constitutes a low carbon steel? What constitutes a low carbon gas or a low carbon asphalt, or a low carbon, does a certain binder for asphalt apply and qualify? So there is a little bit horse before the cart, cart before the horse, but they did want to get these programs up and going. So as EPA develops the national footprint with participation from the other federal agencies, these types of programs at the federal level will start to trigger in for use. And just to give you a timeline of how much, talking about over the next 10 years, we're really talking about, some of these expenditure opportunities for the FHWA program will extend out to 2031. So it really, again, goes to that generational conversation of creating a pathway to substantiate and then kind of solidify the existence of these programs and how it kind of brings in people to be able to participate. Part B of what I mentioned, 1.2 billion, there's still a remaining 800 million. So that would be something that you're more the external partners or folks on this phone call would be a little more interested in monitoring. There's no information on it yet, but the idea is they have held back an $800 million set aside for other entities. And I think they're still, Federal Highways is still working on what other entities would be. So you'll see more on that as time goes on. Carbon reduction or pollution reduction. We have a strategy for that. You'll see 5 of the items listed below. That kind of single out ADOT's area of pollution reduction and the 5 areas of our biggest initial efforts to utilize those funds and comply with some of the goals. So I'll just finish up here with the outer edge of a decade, if not a little bit more. Take this with a grain of salt. It's Steve's thinking. So we'll see how well I do. But there's so much going on, right? Just what we've talked about in 30 minutes is a lot. And how do you package all this? How do you keep track of all this? And so we really felt that it was that generational change was going to take some different type of thinking. So we're rolling this all up. You'll see this roll out from ADOT. I apologize, like all of us, I'm a little bit behind on actually getting this done, but we're going to roll out the entire revised sustainable infrastructure program that all of these different attributes will kind of roll up to. And it kind of falls under a total systems thinking on how we look at all of these things and how they impact the agency. And here's the most intriguing part for us. How does it affect you guys on the phone? How does it affect our participating local public agencies, our federal resource agencies, our tribes? the traveling public, freight, commercial truck. And then the real beauty here is our interest in looking at ADOT as a state agency, and beyond our regional and state responsibilities, what are our federal and global responsibilities to kind of contribute and do our part. So one of the things we just kind of got done completing, which will be part of this outward program reporting over the next couple of months, was mapping all of our activities to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I will single out ASU, the both the School of Sustainability and the Engineering School, Built and Sustainable Environment, for really helping with some of these things and extending some further reporting. And then Anne and I are working on developing a sustainable cities network opportunity to extend these things even further for the benefit of everybody to kind of articulate what all this means. So the last few, what's the landscape look like out there? I think the rollout, initial rollout on the federal highway system for electric vehicle charging systems is underway. We'll start constructing the first wave of those. We anticipate in 2025, with multiple phases to follow after that. Beyond that, I think we can envision, based on other opportunities that the state, as an example, City of Phoenix and others had mentioned about charging system and renewable vehicles under current grant programs that were just put out. So I think out to 2030 and to 2035, you'll see a lot more of the connective tissue in place over that range anxiety. I wouldn't have included commercial truck hydrogen availability. It's exponentially accelerated in the recent year or so, and then there's been a high motivation at the federal level to fund these as well. So I would not be surprised on ADOT's engagement on the renewable fuels discussion out to 2030. More so, I mean, even over the next few years, but I could definitely see commercial hydrogen availability progressing, beyond 2030. And the last thing I'll mention is something I'm relatively enthusiastic about, is unused ADOT right-of-way and how we're exploring the use of building solar arrays. It's another area of discussion that Anne and I have had on having Sustainable Cities Network look at helping us understand how renewable energy, in particular solar energy, could assist in our, especially our rural communities around the state. It's in its infancy. Somebody who I will give full credit to did a really cool 3D diagram for me. So I'll admit the pictures are really attractive. So we're working on it. We have an initial site in mind, and then we'll see how it goes. But we're very committed to renewable energy in unused ADOT right-of-way. So last two things I'll just put out there to really extend the full sustainability discussion. Two areas. So looking at the entire life cycle from a regional and national and global standpoint, and how do you look at all different types of material use, resource use, energy use, workforce use, every one of those things, and trying to find what we really are wanting to look at over the next 10 years is how does ADOT participate in the circular industrial economy? From the standpoint of, you'll see there from a base materials and manufacturing objectives and logistics up through where you have there to the right, the use of the actual product, in our case, right, transportation facility building. And then how do we reuse or remanufacture or recycle all the way back to the core material process? And again, I know a lot of you, especially at the academic level, are a little more closer to this topic and the research on it, but we're pretty heavily committed. I think if we were to pick something out to the end of the 2020s, we would really like to explore a lot more of the how ADOT participates in this circular economy. So that's it. I'm done. I think we still have a few minutes for questions. So
great. Thank you so much, Steve. Wonderful. That was a lot to cover in the time frame. We do have several questions in the chat, several from Elise and then one from Matthew. So Elise, I know you have several in there. Do you want to just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask those really quick? You're still on.
Yeah, I'm still on just for a couple more minutes. I'm curious on ADOT's, the work that you're doing with all of the funding that's coming in, how you're leveraging that. Like, are you getting additional state allocations? Are you getting partners with neighboring jurisdictions? How are you kind of expanding that impact?
Yes, that's a great question. So first, by requirement, without going down a rabbit hole, there's always a state share requirement. So it creates both opportunity and a vexing hurdle to get over. So the obligations that need to be available for ADOT on the state side make it a bit of a hurdle because of the obligation stresses for the entire program, that 9.5 billion that I already shared with you. So yes, there's motivation on leadership to do that. They are doing that. The biggest piece in a lot of these funding efforts are the pass-through. So it's better explained by your regional planning entity. But yes, by requirement, carbon reduction program, many of these other funding mechanisms have a percent requirement pass-through that goes out to other areas. And then the third piece to that is absolutely, I'm kind of a junkie for partnering and getting engagement when we do things. And kind of resilience building is a classic example that we're doing. I'll give an example on 89. For some of you on the phone are familiar up in Flagstaff in working with the county and county flood control. So yes to partnering. Yes, we have a required share that does create opportunity and burden. And then 3, look into the pass-through opportunities that do materialize through your planning entities, regional planning groups.